UCF is going to be paid more than Florida State and going to get paid more than Miami. That is unacceptable to those blue blood teams with national championships. I know UCF says they have a national championship, but we all treat that like a toy in someone's Happy Meal. What is up, everybody? It is Jake with Master of Football back at it again. Happy Tuesday. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to be up to date on everything college football, pro football, Madden, EA college football, NFL draft, anything related to American football, hit that red subscribe button. You will not be disappointed. Also, the like button too. Okay, 980. We're this close to 1,000 subscribers. Okay, do it for me, baby. Please do that. Without further ado, let's get into the video. All right, guys, we have another situation, another nugget from my dear friend, Mr. Brett Yormark. Now, again, he's not the person on this one. It actually comes from Ross Dellinger, but his tweet actually had a really cool little name attached to it here. We're going to get into that because it has to do with the ACC. And again, we know right now there's some rumblings, and again, we don't know if this is smoke or fire, but there's some more rumblings that conference realignment's going to be heating up again because, again, we saw last summer it was USC and UCLA to the Big Ten. The summer before that, it was Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC. We can see some big movement. Now, again, there's lots of things that are impeding that situation right now. One of them is the ACC's deal because it is apparently just absolutely positively ironclad. However, there's been some reports, possibly if you get at least 8 votes to get out of the league, you could do something like that. There's been discussions of lots of things like that because, and I heard about this recently, there is some, what's the term I want to say here? There's some animosity to the fact that potentially this next season and the season after that, UCF, who's seen as the 4th best team, and again, I don't know how best, but you understand the 4th biggest brand in the state of Florida for football, is going to be paid more than Florida State and going to get paid more than Miami. That is unacceptable to those blue blood teams with national championships. I know UCF says they have a national championship, but we all treat that like a toy in someone's Happy Meal. I mean, we had a great season. Okay, you're not the national champs. But anyways, getting into that, we're going to go into this article really quickly here. We have a tweet, and then an article, and then my analysis, because I've got a couple of things we have to talk about because we have to talk about kind of what this article means, what's kind of the following actions from there, because again, whether or not this is going to happen or not, I'm here to give you the news up front, and then my analysis later on. You come to Master Football for the analysis. Let's get into that tweet, and then that article real quick. So here are from Brett McMurphy. And again, yesterday, we said right here, he said basically that, Oregon and Washington are ready and vetted and ready to go. And he says here, he's got a really cool little thing. He went ahead here and he kind of trademarked it out here. So it says, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, UNC, NC State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech are the Magnificent Seven ACC schools, according to Action Network HQ. The schools, Ross Dellinger reported, have met in the past several months. So again, you're seeing this is not a fresh story, but it is something we can talk about, with lawyers examining the grant of rights to determine just how unbreakable it is. The ACC deal runs through 2036. And again, the big situation here, Florida State and Miami, very, very fresh national championships there. They are lamenting the fact that potentially UCF, the 4th biggest brand in Florida, is going to be making more than them with their TV deal. That's how bad the ACC deal is that runs through 2036, another 13 years from now. We go to this article here, and it talks about a couple things, and one of them talks about is the ACC, obviously. This is right here from Ross Dellinger. This week in Amelia Island, right outside of Jacksonville, administrators from the ACC gather for their own spring meetings. More frank discussions are expected about growing the revenue gap between the SEC and the Big Ten, handcuffed by an ESPN broadcasting contract and a grant of rights that extends another 13 years. ACC schools could find themselves more than $30 million behind the SEC and Big Ten in annual distribution by the time 2026 arrives. They're not alone, as the data and analytics company Navigate showed in projections last year. While the Pac-12 and Big 12 fight their Western expansion battle, the ACC is in many ways fighting internally. It says right here, a subset of 7 schools in the 14-member conference. Remember here, Notre Dame is in there as well. They have a vote, but their football's independent. They play the rest of their sports in that league. But it says right here that the 14-member conference has coalesced over what many of them describe as an untenable situation. Officials from the 7 schools, led by Florida State and Clemson, have met a handful of times over the past several months, with the lawyers examining the grant of rights just to determine how unbreakable it is. And again, so far, from what we understand, it is very unbreakable. And again, there's talks about the votes and this and that. I don't want to worry about that. Again, I think this is a classic case where this is a slow time in conference realignment. We're not really sure what's going to happen here. That deal looks pretty untouchable. However, what if it was touched? I want to talk about that situation because there's a couple of things we have to look at here. We have to look at kind of if those 7 schools were available, kind of what's the pecking order for those schools. We also have to discuss, who is most going to benefit from this of those 7 schools and who is the least. We also have to talk about what happens to the other remaining 7 schools in the ACC. Again, Notre Dame's going to be just fine. They'll find a way. They'll play their sports in the American if they don't have to. They'll be fine. They have their football contract. That's all they really care about. And then last but not least, there's another idea that's just so crazy it just might work. Let's get into that real quick. All right, so the first one here is the SEC versus Big Ten preference of the 7 schools listed. Obviously, we mentioned it there. Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, Virginia, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Miami. So the SEC preference is on the left, and the Big Ten preference is on the right. The SEC preference, it's going to break down a little bit different here. SEC preference is at Florida State, I would say number 1, Clemson number 2. They already added regions, so they had Texas and Oklahoma when they added them in there. They already had Texas. They didn't need to expand the region more. They're just looking for good teams and good games and big-time matchups. You add Florida State, you add Clemson. How many straight national championships would that be for the last couple of years? Other than maybe a couple out of Ohio State, it would be absolutely just locking the corner on that for national championships. And then North Carolina and Virginia, and again, the big thing about North Carolina and Virginia, neither the Big Ten nor the SEC operates in those states. They are AAU institutions, so solid schools. They would add those schools there. Then I would say NC State and then Virginia Tech, both kind of, it would have to be if you add North Carolina and Virginia, then you had to add more. You would add NC State and Virginia Tech. You wouldn't add them by themselves per se. And then 7, remember here, the state of Florida, not the state of Florida, but the school of Florida, the Florida Gators, does not want Miami in there because they want to make sure, in the same way that Texas didn't want Houston in the Big 12 because they wanted to make sure, hey, we want to make sure that nobody down there in Houston can play us without coming to our schools. We don't want to be able to recruit against them. Same thing with Miami and the SEC. Unfortunately, I think they would get pushed down even below NC State and Virginia Tech. That's just me. Going over to the Big Ten preferences here, it changes up a little bit here. So we've got North Carolina and Virginia, 2 AAU institutions, state that neither the SEC nor the Big Ten operates in. They would be shoe-ins there. Then, if I had to choose between Miami and Florida State, I think it would be a tie. They would try and do both together, but I think the Big Ten would prefer Miami. Big market, out there. It's got great recruiting ability. It is approaching AAU institution status as well. It's not quite there yet. Florida State is as well, but Miami is approaching that. So again, I think that would be nothing better than a shot across the bow because remember here, Florida has been trying to subtly kind of screw over Miami for the longest time. Well, what would the Big Ten do? Go right over them and take Miami from them. That's what I think they would do. Then Florida State, and then Clemson, NC State, Virginia Tech, they're all maybes just because they're not AAU institutions. I think there would be long shots there. But again, that would be my order of the preference here between the SEC and what they would prefer, and then the Big Ten and what they would prefer. We talk about this here, the ACC schools, this makes the most sense for. We have the most and the least. On the most side, North Carolina and Virginia, if they break this contract, AAU members with large followings in the states not in the Big Ten or the SEC, it would be a bidding war for North Carolina and Virginia between both conferences because both of them don't have teams there. They would love to add those new markets. They would love that. And then Clemson and Florida State because of the huge amount of fan support / interest, national championships, blah, blah, blah. However, I think they would probably be SEC only. Depends on what Florida State does with the AAU status. But Clemson, of course, the SEC doesn't care. The SEC is like, you good? Cool. Add them in. We'd love to have Clemson in our league. So I think that's what they would go from there. The least would be Virginia Tech and NC State. The least would be, like I said, Virginia Tech would basically be SEC only. They're not an AAU institution. And they're nowhere near the top of the SEC's wish list. So again, maybe if they wanted to pair somebody up with Virginia, if they got Virginia, that would be a thing they could do there. Also, we have here is the NC State. So again, not AAU, so only SEC would provide value if they were included with UNC. So again, would be far down the list there. So Virginia Tech and NC State are kind of like the tag-along schools along with North Carolina and Virginia. And again, they might actually be better on the field many times. I know that the last 25 years, Virginia Tech has had a better brand than Virginia has. But there's many things here. You have to appease the presidents too. They would probably want North Carolina and Virginia, both the SEC and the Big Ten, over Virginia Tech and NC State from both of those leagues. I didn't include Miami here because Miami, I think, is a really unique situation. The SEC is, and especially Florida, is going to rally against bringing them in. Now, remember here, that once Texas left the Big 12, Houston was added in. I'm not going to say that anything like that's going to happen. No, nobody's going to leave the SEC per se, but I do know that as these conference wars get bigger and bigger, maybe they'll be like, all right, fine, let Miami in, something like that. But Miami would be much better, a stronger candidate than Virginia Tech or NC State for both of those leagues. And then I think that Miami would be a stronger candidate for the Big Ten than Clemson would be. But again, that's just me. So I came up with my name here. So it says right here, what happens to the STBU7? What I nickname him is the sucks to be U7, because these 7 schools aren't going to be included in this list. You saw that I included those 7 out there, and then it said the Magnificent 7, and then the sucks to be U7. That's kind of the list that I have here. So we go through a couple schools here. Boston College through Louisville. What do I think would happen should these all vote to get out of the league, vote to disband the contract, something like that? Boston College would listen to the Big 12. I'm not so sure whether or not they're really prioritizing football in a big way there. And again, they've got a lot of history. Doug Flutie, these guys, but I just don't know how much they would really want to, kind of like Cal and Stanford. They're like, yeah, well, we got a football program, whatever. Duke would just go independent. Okay, they would go UConn, they would go independent. They would probably just get destroyed in football. They still keep their basketball program. They would just do that. They would find a league. They might go to the Big East. They would do something like that, a la UConn. Georgia Tech. Now listen up here. Let's just say Florida State goes to the SEC, and then Miami goes to the Big Ten, and the Big Ten's like, well, we want to add a pair down there. That would make it a lot better. What if we got good old hot Atlanta? Because Georgia Tech is an AAU institution in the heart of SEC country, could pair up with Miami if Florida State were to go to the SEC. Again, possible Big Ten dark horse. Just keep that in mind there. But again, if they would do what they have to do there. Again, you're not really, it's kind of like Boston College. I'm not really sure if they would want to do a Big 12 move. They could. And again, they're reasonably close to UCF, but we'll see what happens there. Louisville just seems like it's got the Big 12 written all over it. A super dark horse for the Big 10. Again, that would be only if they wanted to further encroach on SEC territory. Highly unlikely. They're not an AAU member, but it is something to keep in mind. I do think that with West Virginia, with Cincinnati, I think that Louisville's got Big 12 written all over if they were not going to be invited to the SEC or the Big 10. And then the second half of the sucks to be U7, Pitt through Wake Forest. So Pitt, Big 12 member written all over them. Again, so right now, they're a super dark horse for the Big 10. They are an AAU member. However, they're already in Pennsylvania. So and how, Louisville was a super dark horse. And then Georgia Tech was a dark horse. Pitt is a super dark horse. So it's in between both of those two schools there because, like I said, AAU member satisfies that. Pretty good football, plays in a pro stadium, already in Pennsylvania, doesn't really give you a new market. Not really sure how much they would want there. And again, that would be if these conferences would have to get to like 27, 28 members before Pitt gets in my perspective. But again, we continue on. Syracuse, formerly an AAU member in a state that the Big Ten doesn't currently, operate in. So, that's a possibility there in New York because we all know that Rutgers is in New Jersey. But Syracuse, not sure about the size of the brand that they are. I don't really know if that's, I would probably choose Pitt over them because, again, current member versus former. And even if they are in the same state, they have to oversaturate. They probably wouldn't mind that because it would cut down on a lot of travel costs. Again, not super big deal when you're getting paid 100 or 70 million bucks a year from your conference payout. And last but not least, Wake Forest, they feel like either a Big 12 invite, but probably would be an independent move. Duke and Wake Forest would probably go independent and join the Big East in all other sports. Same with UConn, and then they would probably just, like I said, be independent. They would just go around and sign a bunch of payoff games, and go from there. And remember here, this is super hypothetical. We talked about this before. The Pacific Conference, the Pac-12, I saw the Pacific because it's like Pac-12, 10, 8, 6. I don't know what the hell to make of it. Pac-8 and the ACC 7, maybe even 8 there. Because remember here, where there was talk about Oregon and Washington leaving for the Big 10. I highly doubt that. But again, if it did, there was discussions between the Pac and the ACC about a super merger there. So what if that were to look like, let's just say Oregon and Washington go to the Big 10? Again, I don't think so, but it'd be Arizona State, Cal, Colorado, Oregon State, Stanford, Utah, and Washington State. No San Diego State, no SMU. And then add the ACC schools, Boston College, Duke, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Pitt, Syracuse. Add from the independent ranks, good old UConn, who has been listed out there a lot more in conference realignment because, you know, hey, their football program's all right. The basketball program's really good. And then add Wake Forest in there too. What they would do something like this. They'd have a 16-team conference. You have 8 on the West Coast, and again, some of the Mountain Time Zone. You have 8 on the East Coast. One team would play 7 on your side. You'd play 2 from the other side. And you'd have one of them visit you, and you would visit one. You would have one East Coast trip a year if you're on the West Coast, or on the East Coast, you'd have one West Coast trip a year. And what you would do there is these teams would play each other. Whoever wins the league plays their side, would play in a conference championship, would probably rotate between, I don't know, maybe like somewhere in the East Coast, somewhere in the West Coast, whatever it was. This would be not a bad idea in my perspective here. But again, this is kind of, we're speculating right here, but that's what we got to do. It's May, man. And again, I want to make sure I temper all expectations here because this is a cool little conversation we can kind of get into. But Bill Connolly of ESPN, formerly covering my Raiders, a little boy, he says right here about this tweet, he says, this is a super tasty nugget and with a fun name to match, but I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with this. Are they forming a tiny ACC? Is the Big Ten expanding to 23, 26, 28, something like that? Am I supposed to pretend they're actually allied and wouldn't turn on each other in a heartbeat? That is a very, very important thing to remember with all this conference realignment stuff. So the Magnificent Seven, those 7 ACC schools are rumored to want to be out of their deal. Because remember here, Florida State and Miami have really, really recent national championships. And UCF, the 4th biggest brand in the state, is going to get paid more than them potentially from their conference payout. There's lots of pressure out there. They're talking about unequal revenue distribution. They're talking about weird little situations like that. So if they were able to break the deal, that's what I think would happen there. Again, the SEC would go after Florida State and Clemson more than likely. I think that the Big Ten would go after Virginia and North Carolina. I also think Miami is a dark horse to the Big Ten. Do I think they're imminently about to terminate the deal? No, but remember here, these are the same conversations we're probably going to be happening 10 years from now, 3 years before the ACC deal comes up. I'm telling you right now, I'm just being ahead of my time with this analysis. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for being here. Please get in the comments right now, okay? Let me know what you guys think is going to happen because, again, I think this is a hypothetical. But, again, I'm really interested to see what kind of would happen there. These schools go over here. These schools go over there. What would you do if they have to combine some stuff? Get in the comments and let me know what you think. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you guys later. I am out.